Welcome to the final session of the Family Cafe Saturday portion of the event. Please give a warm welcome to our next speaker, the Family Cafe's very own Katherine Smith.
I guess I don't need to stand there. Can everybody hear me okay? Hi, my name is Katie Smith. I am a board member of the Family Cafe. If you're watching at home and you can't see me, I am a white woman with long brown hair. I have on ripped jeans, and my mom is going to kill me for this, so sorry, Mom. And I have on a chef's coat that's red and about 2 sizes too large, but you know, we're just living our best up here. I've been coming to the Family Cafe since I was 4 years old, which is wild to say. I'm only 27, and my mom was one of the founding people with Lori to start the Family Cafe, and literally every year I've been coming, and it's just something that's so close to my heart. Currently now I work in Georgia. I work at the Department of Public Health as one of their lobbyists, and before that I spent 6 years in Florida politics. So I'm very passionate about disability rights and disability advocacy. More importantly, I'm very passionate about giving other people the tools to be an effective advocate. So this session, if you're here for the mental illness, that was canceled, so it was replaced by this, is how to be an effective lobbyist or an effective advocate. You can call them either things. So when you are at the Capitol and you're talking to lawmakers, you know what you're doing, and you can get what you want done. That's ultimately the end goal. So like I said, I've been coming to the Family Cafe for 23 years. My older brother, Daniel, has autism and Tourette syndrome, and quite frankly, if I didn't have Daniel, I wouldn't be here, and he is the best. He is just the light of all of our lives, and he keeps things interesting, of course. So I just wanted to talk to y'all about the legislative process. I think I might have some special guests coming also that know about the legislative process, and then I want it to be very interactive. So if you have questions, just ask me, and I'm happy to help. No question is ridiculous, I promise you, because this is a complicated process, and I have been in it, you know, forever, but it is complex. And if you have a problem in your life and you think that you can take that legislative route, I want to be able to give you those tools to get that done. So who here is registered to vote? By a show of hands. Love it. I love it. So it seems like everybody here is registered to vote. More importantly, who in your family? Do you have people in your family that don't vote? Does anybody have people like that don't vote in your family? Yes. Yes. So why is it important to vote? I'm going to ask some questions. To get your voice heard. That is so right. And sometimes I think people, you know, they get burnt out by the process. Trust me, I get burnt out by the process, and you get a little, you know, sometimes people aren't nice. But still, it is so important to vote. It's so important to get the people in your family registered to vote and go out and vote and vote for people who are gonna, you know, have your voice in the halls of the Capitol. And for this cause, for disability issues. So what kind of issues are you looking at? So for me, with Daniel, he's on Medicaid waiver. So for me, it's really important that we have that funding for that. So who's gonna vote for that, or who's gonna be our champion for that sort of thing? So my next question is, what is advocacy? So I'm talking a lot about being an effective advocate. What does that actually mean? We're gonna get you a mic. Oh, I don't think it's on.
Raising your voice and speaking up for others or yourself. There's self-advocacy, and then I think there's also advocating for others, which I think is called systems advocacy, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
And then I heard you mention like the legislative process. Is that a different type of advocacy?
It can be. So if I'm going to the Capitol and I am advocating on behalf of my brother Daniel, but I'm advocating to legislators, that would be legislative advocacy. And now we have Joe McCann, who I have been honored to work with in Tallahassee. He has a little bit more years under his belt. He's a little bit older, but he's going to help us out. We're talking about the process of legislative advocacy.
Okay.
We asked who was registered to vote, just to catch you up to speed.
Great. Who is registered to vote?
Yeah, who in this room was
okay,
registered to vote, and why is that important? So we heard about
Good.
that. And
Good.
then now
Please.
we're talking about advocacy.
Excellent.
Who here knows who their state representative is or their state senator? Who can tell me who your, I'm gonna call out Jeremy. Who's your state representative?
I believe it's Allison Tant.
Allison
That's
Tant,
right.
District 9,
Yes, and the senator is Loran Osley.
Correct.
Exactly.
Do I get a star or a cookie
You
or
get a
something?
star for that.
Yeah, a star from
Hey,
me.
maybe we can talk a little bit about how do you figure out
Yeah.
who is your representative or who is your county commissioner, because there's city races, there's a lot of races that are very important. And if you go to your local, do you know the answer?
Mine is Lee Constant. He's our commissioner.
Lee Constantine, that's right. He used to be
Yeah.
a state senator as well. Yes. Yes. Well, you would go to your supervisor of elections website, and actually if you go to myfloridahouse.com, you can put in your zip code, and they'll tell you everybody, the myflorida.com website will tell you exactly who your state representative, state senator, your congressional delegation. It's really important to know who all those people are when we, just even to begin this process, so you know who you can talk to and the different issues that they can work on.
And we've been lucky because we heard from the governor yesterday. We heard from one of our United States senators yesterday. We have 2 United States senators. And then wherever you live, you have a House representative and a state senator. And then locally,
Yes.
you have county commissioners, depending on where you
City
live, maybe
commissioners,
city
yep.
commissioners. All these people matter, and all politics is local. And I
Yep.
say that, and I say that, and I
Exactly.
say that. But I've worked for elected officials. I worked
Yep.
in a lobbying firm. Now I'm in the public sphere. And I promise you, if you go to one of these people,
Yes.
you might have to go once or twice, but you're going to get an answer. And
Yes.
Go
The
in
most
with an
important
ask.
thing is actually just knowing who the person is and introducing yourself. We like to say it's all about relationships, right? And so it's not so important to understand all the issues. You don't have to know, about the intricacies of issues or bills. That process moves so fast and it moves constantly. The important thing is to know who to talk to. And so to be able to put a face to the name on the issues, especially with issues like disabilities that are so personal in nature, right? For you to just be able to know who the person is to talk to and to go tell them what are the issues that you care about. And when those things come up, and if somebody helps you by telling you, hey, call your representative or your city commissioner or your county commissioner, guess what? You know them. And so that's really 90% of the battle. So, there's a lot of discussions on the issues and policies, but the people who actually can get to those people because they've developed a relationship, because you bump into them at Publix.
right.
You guys go, your children go to school together, or you know them from the community. That is half of the battle.
And I would say anyone can be an advocate. You are our best lobbyist. You're sitting
Absolutely.
right here, right now, because a paid lobbyist can go into a member's office.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go in, and I'm going to go in with Daniel, my brother, and I say, Daniel, our livelihood depends on Medicaid.
That's
and
right.
so they're going to remember that. I'll also say when meeting with legislators, sometimes it's best to go during the summer. So make a
Yeah.
meeting next month and say, hey, I'm Katie Smith. I live in your district. These are the issues that are important to me because of X, Y, Z.
That's right.
Because in the summer, they're not in legislative session. So they have a little bit more time. So you can create that relationship now to use next legislative session if you want to go and lobby on Capitol Hill or something
That's
like
right.
that.
No, that's exactly right. And for people to put Daniel's face in their mind
Yes.
when they're thinking about Medicaid, because the thing you got to realize, especially about the state legislature, is it's a 60-day session. To say that it moves quickly is the biggest understatement in the world, right? It is like you can't even see how fast it's the speed of sound. So when that person, when something comes up to a legislator, when they're in a committee meeting or when they're listening to somebody speak, and they think, oh, wait a minute, Daniel.
Yeah.
We're talking Medicaid. That's Daniel. I need
Daniel
to pay
depends on that.
attention to this, and they have a name to the face, and they have a face rather to the issue, and that's half the battle.
And so along that line, how do you schedule a meeting with your legislators?
Yes.
So that's a question. So if you're meeting with your state representative or your state senator, you can go on to My Florida House. If you're going to your county or your city, you can go on every person pretty much has a legislative aid or an aide, and it'll be listed underneath that. Email them and say, hey, I'm Joe McCann. Can I have 15 minutes of your time? I'm a constituent. It's the summer. They're going to meet with you. So now you have that relationship, and you're starting your network.
Yeah, and you'd actually be surprised how many legislators really want to see the people in their community, want to get to know the people who understand the issues, because you provide an important resource to them as well. You know, they can't understand all these issues. They can't know what the impacts of these things are, because honestly, they're not told in the heat of the moment and all that. So it's important if you can develop that relationship, and Katie is absolutely right. The legislative aide's job is to kind of be a gatekeeper for those guys sometimes, and just in terms of time management. So getting to know the legislative aide can oftentimes be just as important as knowing the legislator, because no matter how much you know the legislator, if you can't talk to them because they're on the floor or they're in a commission meeting, you know, it doesn't matter. So to know the legislative aide is hugely important.
Yeah, and if you get a meeting with an aide, let's say that I reach out to Allison Tant, who's my state representative in Tallahassee, and I reach out to Allison's aide and I say, hey, I'd like some time. Well, she's out of the office this week. Can you want to meet with me? Then don't be offended if they offer for a meeting with you and an aide. Oftentimes, aides, they get things done. So if you have a project that you want, or funding, or an issue that you want to work on, don't be offended, because those are the aides. They're actually the ones that are staying till 3 o'clock in the morning during session, writing bills, getting things passed, and that's a relationship for you to have. And when you go in, be nice. You know, if you're on the other side of the aisle, you're not going to get anything done if you're rude.
Yes.
Go in and, you know, look the part. Don't wear ripped jeans.
Right.
Don't do that. Don't
Be
make your
professional.
mother.
That's
don't
right.
make your mother not proud by wearing ripped jeans. And go in, be
Yeah.
nice, and just know you're not going to have 30 minutes. You're going to have 10 minutes.
10, right.
So you practice at home with your family, with your friends, your elevator speech. So maybe you have less than 10 minutes.
Right.
In session, maybe you have 2 minutes. But in the off session, you have 10.
If you can't explain the issue in about 5 minutes, then
It's lost on them.
it's gonna be lost, because there's a certain amount of bandwidth that people have. It's kind of like at a wedding, when everybody's coming up to you and they're sort of talking to you at the same time. You're just hearing so much, and if somebody is just taking too much of that, there's just not enough. So that's an important thing. That's a great point. 5 minutes, you got to make sure you can get that in about a 5-minute time span.
So what are some issues that you all face in your community? And maybe we can walk through some of these issues and tell you if the legislative route is the right route, or if you should reach out to your city commissioner or what. So what are some issues that you face in your community now? And maybe we can help you navigate those.
I had an issue about not having the bus on weekends or holidays, especially. Yeah, I had this issue about the train and bus and Lake Mary not being out there for me to ride on, even to go to church and stuff like that, and to come here because I was late, because train is not in the weekends and holidays, and I wanted so bad to get it on weekends and holidays and nighttime so that no one would be stranded. And we need the bus on Sundays and holidays as well.
Yeah.
And I need the bus over here to the, what do you call it, the Country Club Road between Sun Road train station and Seminole State Colleges. And I like to have the bus stop each side at the corner of the Country Club and Estella Road as well. And I like to have the bus stop, the bus up there. And I like to have the bus also on the Oviedo Boulevard to get back on the bus stop or belong, so I'll be able to go to and from swimming without being confused and without having to call or anything like that.
Right. So transportation.
Thank you.
Every time that.
I need every hour.
Yeah.
Every half hour. I should say.
Yeah. So who here has issues with transportation? Getting places, yeah, that's one that I hear a lot when I try to talk to people about advocacy. So what is something that we can do about transportation in our communities?
Sure.
And can we go to our legislators?
Great point, and that's an important question to know. A lot of times, if it's just an issue of timing, that can be a city or county issue. That's not necessarily a legislative issue, and so It's probably, it depends on where you live. If you live in the county, it could be the county. If you live in the city, it's probably the city if it's a time or schedule thing. But if it's a policy issue like that, that would probably be the state. If you want more money for transportation, that kind of thing, that's going to be a state issue. But that's also one of the reasons, listen guys, that's one of the reasons to get to know the legislative aid. All right, because you don't necessarily want to call your representative to ask a question about the process or that kind of thing.
Right.
If you make a friendship, listen, that kind of question can be answered by an intern, by the district secretary, by someone. But if you know people in the office and you can call them and say, hey, listen, I have this issue about the buses. I'm not sure if it's a funding issue. I'm not sure if it's the city has decided to put the schedules on these times. You have that relationship, you can make the call. And I was a legislative aide myself at one point, and that was hard when people would come all the way to Tallahassee or would be talking about an issue and you find out, hey, that's federal or that's local. That happens a lot. So develop those relationships back home, but just to kind of answer your question, what you just described sounds to me like a city issue, like a local government issue. And so getting to know your city commissioner, your mayor, any of your county commissioners, that would be a question for those guys. But transportation is critical, and I know it impacts a lot.
Issues.
Yeah, it really is. And in large part, that can be a funding issue. And I know there's also a lot of coordination between counties. That's an issue that I think David Darm probably talked about while he was here, and he's always available to answer questions like that as well.
Are there other issues that we face in our communities? Yeah.
I actually have a question. How
sure.
would one approach their state legislature on a topic or on an issue that's in their state? How would one go from point A to point B to do that?
That is an excellent question.
Great question.
That's a great question. And I am excited to hear that hopefully you want to do that because we need young people in the process because they're usually like Joe's age or older. So we need some young folks.
Excuse me?
So if you need to go to myfloridahouse.gov and it's myflhouse.gov, you put in your zip code and whatever it is, it'll show you who your state representative is, your state senator, and then I think your local people too. And so depending on the issue, so if it's like a local issue like we were talking about, maybe the transportation in that case was local, but if it's something policy-wise or getting statewide funding or big amounts of money, you would reach out to their aide and say, hey, my name is, and I'd like to schedule a meeting with you to talk about XYZ. And then that's when we're going back to like the elevator speech. You're not gonna have 30 minutes, you have maybe 5 to 10, if that, to say, hey, I'm really passionate about this or whatever.
Yeah, and I'll say something. Since you brought up my age, I will say this to the young people in the room.
We need young people in the process.
Yeah, so here's the thing. You know what? You guys are so much better at this than we are. Google it. Google at some level some of the issue and just try to figure out, what is the jurisdiction of that thing. But again, I'll go back to if you have the relationship with somebody, and it's really our responsibility almost to have that relationship. And you can, to call and ask the question, but how do you approach it? I would call the legislative aide. I would call, depending on what type of issue it is, first of all, do your homework. That's really important because these guys, it's like seeing a doctor that you're not going to have a lot of time, right? The time is valuable. And, they hear a million different things every day. So know the issue and then call the office and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this. This is an issue I'm interested in that kind of, I'd like you to tell me what you know about it, maybe what you're working on with it, what are the issues that you hear are coming up. And that's really an issue that is almost more appropriate for the aide, just to kind of give me some background. And in the course of that, you can say, I'd like to see the representative or the senator and try to schedule that. But, the important part of that would be doing your homework. But how do you make a meeting? You call up and you ask. And my suggestion for you, though, is before you actually have that meeting with whoever they decide to, schedule that with, is you do your homework, know what you're talking about, as best you can. You don't have to be an expert in any way, but just understand what the messages that you want to get across and what the information is that you want to get from them.
Right, and when you schedule the meeting or when you ask to, tell them what you're requesting it. So my name is Katie Smith, I'm your constituent. I would like to meet with you about Medicaid funding. I keep bringing that up because Daniel, but I would like to talk to you about this specific thing and what can we do about this or whatever. So you're not just like, hi, I'd like to meet with you. So they're kind of prepared too. Is there
Can I
a
just
certain
add one
issue?
thing to that?
Yeah.
Sometimes there are kind of meetings where you're looking for information, and sometimes there are meetings that you are making a request. And my advice, and Kay knows this all too well, sometimes it's important to, if you get a yes, as we say, take your yes and leave. So if you're asking somebody to support something and and they say, I'm supporting you, awesome, get the meeting, and it doesn't, you don't have to, continue to go over the issue once they understand it, once you understand it. So there's two different kinds of meetings like that in that regard. So just know that.
Is there a certain issue that you're interested in or that you'd want to work on or something in your community?
No, I was personally going to ask what type of information and how much I should bring, because you mentioned the elevator speech and not trying to like take up too much of the time. But is there a thing where I can like say it too fast where they don't get the point across?
No, that's a great point.
That's an excellent
great
question.
point,
And
yes.
I would say no matter what meeting you have, if it's with your local people or your state representatives, leave behind. We call them a one-pager in the political world. And it's basically like, this is the issue, this is how we fix it. It's going to take X amount of money if that's the case, or if it's a policy issue, no fiscal impact. And, it's just kind of like, it breaks it down because they have so many meetings per day. So if you go in and you might be with them for 5 minutes, but then they have 20 other 5-minute meetings, but you left the one pager, so they're like, oh, I remember now, and here it is on paper.
And you can also include in that, but the white paper or one pager or whatever you call it is really important, and that's succinct, and that's kind of like your speech, your conversation as well, depending on the amount of time you have. But you can also leave background materials as well. You can leave more.
Absolutely.
And they may or may not have time to look through all of that, but if they wanted it, it's good to have. But it's just as important to have that kind of one pager, real succinct. Here's what I need from you, and here's just some background on it.
Yeah, but if you do have data or something that's sources, more information is better, I would think. Yeah.
Hi. So I have a question for a friend. And so my friend recently applied for a job, and they said they wanted to hire him, all that. And so he got to the interview part, and he told me that he was about there for like 30 seconds. They saw that basically he had a disability, and they basically told him up front, because you have a disability, I'm not going to hire you. That's basically what they told him.
That's illegal.
So that's illegal.
So, so there is something is there something he can do about that, is what I'm asking, basically.
Yeah, he could.
If any employer, if anybody, that's discrimination, and that's, of course, against pretty much all local, state, and federal laws. So there are places where you could file a complaint on that. I'm not, that would be the first step. If that really, if you get into a situation like that and it's not, I would always try to talk it through, but if you can't and that's just the thing, then you would file a complaint on that. And we can get back to you in terms of where that would be most appropriate to file with, but yeah, that would be the route on if you heard something like that.
But it's not right, and it is illegal.
That is, yeah.
I have a little bit of a broader question. Okay, so one of the issues that I've also discussed before is people with disabilities and law enforcement, right? So I don't know if you can answer this question, but I remember reading up a case where there were police officers that were involved, and this didn't happen in Florida, but it happened in Los Angeles, where like 2 officers shot and killed a man who had autism. And he was 28 years old, but none of the officers were not charged with the crime that they were not charged with the actions that they had because it was excessive force. So I remember that I went to a session here at Cafe before where they discussed an initiative of try to see like what they can do for people with disabilities and for law enforcement. My question is that how are we going to be able to, or like, I don't know if you guys can answer this, but how are we going to be able to try to at least have an initiative of people with law enforcement and people with disabilities to try to bridge a type of communication, and hopefully we can be able to fix those type of issues?
That's a great question. That's something I really care about because, over think it's over 50% of people that are harmed by law enforcement have disabilities. And so I think about Daniel, and I just think that he's been in situations like that. That could be a policy thing. So it could be something that we bring forth hypothetically. You have some sort of like disability sensitivity training and requiring law enforcement to go through X amount of hours about how to work with, you know, people with disabilities. That could be a big policy.
But sometimes, like even if the officers who have gone through some amounts of training to at least try to understand or try to at least help people with disabilities or whatnot, but unfortunately, sometimes when it comes to like someone reaching for something, I know there's going to be that gun-ho tactic that they're going to be able to use deadly force, and then it comes to a situation, even if it doesn't matter if it's like a traffic stop or if they were trying to find a way to communicate with someone who's nonverbal. I have a cousin who lives in New York, and she's nonverbal. She cannot really, you know, talk at all, but at least she tries to talk or tries to at least communicate through a tablet. And one of the things that really kind of gets me a bit nervous about discussing these issues, because of the fact is that she is more likely or twice as more likely to be shot and killed by a police officer than a person without a disability. And since a lot of people who have disabilities are incarcerated right now as we speak, it's been an issue that's kind of been heavily ignored for probably years. And so even if, let's say, for example, one of the sessions that I've been in where they tried to introduce the thing called the wallet card. I don't know if you guys ever heard of that. What it is that it's a identification of what type of disability that person has. Right. So if a person who has more invisible or more physical, it actually gives the card to that police officer, and they'll have like an emergency contact. So that way the officer can actually, or a first respondent can actually call somebody. It could be a caretaker, it could be a parent, to do something, you know, at least, you know, like to discuss the officer, like, you know, this is what my child has, and sometimes my child doesn't like talking to strangers or something like that. So like what, like, you know, as far as this goes, like what can we actually do to be able to maybe, you know, push an initiative like that or something that's quite similar? So maybe, hopefully, we can actually build a bridge between, you know, first responders and, you know, people with disabilities.
Yeah, and I think it takes creative solutions.
Can I say this too? I think that, Alex, what you're referring to too, there was a piece of legislation with the D, that passed.
Yeah, it did 2 sessions ago.
It passed.
But you have to opt in.
Yeah, and just so you, just to explain, it was a D that they would put on your driver's license. It's optional. It's a little controversial, but I think that's what made the, you know, obviously it was always probably going to be optional, but that would identify you as having a disability, so that if you got pulled over or if they looked at your driver's license, they could see on that you have a disability. So, I mean, that was just one thing they did. But Alex, that is an issue that they talk about a lot in Tallahassee. That's a perfect example of an issue to go and talk to your legislator about and say, really care about this.
And come up with, you know, if you have other creative solutions. I mean, it takes a lot of minds getting together, and I don't think it's like a one-size-fits-all sort of thing to fix this really big problem.
That's right.
But I think that it's so important. It's something I think and I worry about all the time with my brother. But I think it's going to take creative minds like yours to go forward and say, you know, I have this idea of maybe how, you know, we can fix this. And maybe it's not, maybe the driver's license isn't the answer.
Right.
Maybe it's something else. And so, you know, working together, working with your colleagues here, and, you know, if that's an initiative that you want to work on, like...
They spend a lot of time talking about the training that our law enforcement gets and should get. So, yes.
But that's a perfect example of being able to go to your legislator and saying, hey, there's this problem. I have this solution. Maybe can we work on this?
Yeah.
I have a question. Being born in Puerto Rico and being part of the cafe and stuff like that, one of the things I deal with a lot is the language barrier, and knowing the services that I had available when I came from Puerto Rico was a way that you can approach, even me, I can approach a person that doesn't know what things they have available, and also how to word it to them, how to approach their local legislator to kind of, how can I say, voice out their concerns. Because a lot of the times where, for instance, with where I'm from, when we don't feel like we're voiced, we tend to get loud. And it's not loud in a way to be derogatory, but it's more of the passion of it all. Right. And sometimes that could come across as being, oh, here's another Hispanic person yelling at me, and you not knowing what they're talking about or even knowing the language, it could come off as being something bad, and now everybody's, snowballed into this one situation. So, yeah, into that one stereotype. So I'm saying, like, what's a good way to kind of talk to them to get through that process? Like, how do I approach that?
Well, if it's about the language barrier, I think most materials on My Florida House are in Spanish as well.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about there too is really a training issue. Is really ability of encouraging, different training. And listen, half of this is understanding, and listen, our law enforcement has a really hard job, and there's a lot of things that get thrown at them, but I'd be surprised if that wasn't a little bit of the training that they have already. But listen, that's an issue, that you could dive in deeply with your legislator and give them your personal experiences and let them, take that for what they can, and give them some ideas as well.
Yeah, and depending on where you live, I don't know who your legislator is, but...
That's right. No, but that's a good question. Yeah. We had one over here. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries. Twofold question or answer. We went to a session called My Wallet Card, which is actually a program that somebody started from Miami that is similar to what you were talking about with first responders, and people that are developmentally delayed would have a card that they show to the first responder or police officer that says, I may delay in answering, or I flap my hands, or I don't make eye contact, so the police officer knows. So it kind of helps that first interaction. So that might be something to look in when you're talking about dealing with the first responders, that somebody does have something out there, so maybe the more advocacy we could have around that program to get something out there would help.
That's a great point.
My second point or question is, we did go to our legislator to get my brother onto the waiver program, so it does work. But I guess my question is now, with different things going through the House and the Senate and different bills coming up, how do we know, or where do we go to kind of get an understanding what's coming up and what we should advocate towards or against? Because I know there was one bill that came up recently. They said, hey, everybody call, tell them to vote no. But it was like, tell them no, like within 48 hours.
Right.
Like, how do we know what's coming up and what we should focus on to kind of get a head start on it?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it really is.
First, I would say you should apply for partners in policymaking through the Florida Developmental Disabilities Council. And I'm happy to talk to you about that later, and it just helps you become, you get all the tools, more than just this session. As far as following along,
Yeah. So
there's a lot.
Well, there is. What you just described is the reason that people hire lobbyists, right? And even the most seasoned lobbyist has a hard time keeping up, okay?
Yes.
Because when you're in the last 30 days of legislative session, the only people that really know, if you've read about it in the paper and it's toward the end of session, that information is probably old, okay? It's that fast. It's on a daily basis. So what the honest answer to that is probably get involved with an organization that is following that for you. I don't want to say it's impossible, but the My Florida website, myfloridahouse.gov, is very good. You can track bills, and they'll email you when something is, changes on the bills. And the Senate page, flsenate.gov, but the myfloridahouse.gov is good because you can put, and then it'll allow you to put the number of the bills that you're looking at, like the bill number, or tracked by issue. So that's sort of the short answer. But the better answer is, join an organization, be it Family Cafe, maybe it's the DD Council, it's some organization that's watching it for you, because it's really hard to do that from home. And that's why you get those things that say, hey, and it's usually because, and as Katie knows, when you get toward the end of session, they're scheduling committee meetings like 48 hours out. so the sponsors of bills don't know their bills are even on agendas, but for a couple of days' notice. So now you got to get all this stuff. So, that you just got to be prepared, but go to the My Florida House website, sign up for that, and then, whatever the issues are that you're interested in, join an organization that's following that, and then they can give you legislative updates.
Like the Family Cafe, we do a legislative update every Friday at
That's
4
right.
p.m. and it's
4
a
p.m.
call. And so basically every Friday throughout the legislative session, it's an hour. You can jump on, you can jump off, and we'll say, this bill was filed. We're worried about this bill. We need you to write your legislator. Or we love this bill, and this would be so good for our families. We need you to write your legislator or call them. So you can sign up for that call, and you're here now, so you're going to get the emails forever and ever and ever. So you'll know when they are. That's a good way if you want to be more involved. I'm happy to talk you through that too. But that's a good way as an introductory kind of what's going on at the Capitol.
Oh, that's exactly right. That's good. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if she has a mic. We'll come to you in just
I'm sorry.
a second.
We should be following Sarah.
We'll come to you in just a second. We have a mic over here.
Sorry.
So, my brother is like severely disabled, and like if he ends up somewhere in like police custody, he wouldn't be able to like communicate with them per se, because like he can't answer questions like if they ask him like what's your name, he's only gonna be able to tell them his name's like Mikhail.
Right.
That's all he's going to be able to tell him. He's not going to be able to tell him like where he's from or like what his address is or like who his parents are. So how could something like help? How could I have lost my words.
No.
That's a good question.
What's a policy solution for this? We have so many of these problems, and it's up to us to find policy solutions.
That's
so
right.
What's a solution for this? And can we take the legislative route?
And that's a question that you could ask your legislator. Say, look, that's what we're talking about in terms of putting the face to the issue. You have that meeting with your legislator and say, look, this is something that's happening in my life. This really worries me, and so what should I do? And you can ask that question as well. Who would I talk to about that? And there could be an agency that you could maybe help. They could maybe hook you up with somebody to give you some good advice on that.
DJJ. Everybody has a lobbyist, is the thing.
Right.
So the Department of Juvenile Justice, they have a legislative person. Their job is to work with you. So no matter what your issue is, there is someone on the other side of this government fence that is here to help. And sometimes it's just finding who that person is, and that can be complicated. But there is someone there, and there is a solution. I promise you.
And you bring up a good point too, because you don't always approach your legislator with the solution either, right? You approach your legislator with like, here's my issue, and I need some help in figuring it out. And again, like I said before, they can help, direct you to the right people.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question.
So he has started contacting his state legislatures about driving laws, particularly for him for people with simple partial seizures that don't pass out, if they can do modify the license so it involves what is it called? Semi-autonomous vehicles, because currently fully autonomous is okay, but we don't have those yet. So so he's got an idea and has written to the legislatures. But I guess my question is, what's the follow-up on that? Because I don't know of anybody else who's brought this up, and probably our letter and slight meeting isn't going to maybe go anywhere. So what's the next step as far as following through on that and just seeing, because like you said, there's a lot of legislation going on all the time. How do we get our little voices heard?
Well, that's a great question. There's power in numbers too. So you don't have a small voice, and if you have neighbors or you have friends, and if you're all in this one district and you all say, Representative Smith, I want you to file a bill this session that allows this. So it would be a bill that would need to pass through the legislature for this issue. Creating a coalition to do that, it takes a lot of work for anything to start from the beginning, and it might not pass the first session, but it might pass the third. And it just takes
yeah.
work. It takes a lot of work, and it will wear you down, but then there's such reward at the end of it. I don't know if you have any more thoughts about
Katie,
that.
well, I was just going to say that's a great suggestion in terms of the coalition thing, because I'll
Yeah.
tell you, you're absolutely right. That's what happens a lot of times. You go and you meet with somebody and they say, hey, this is a great idea, and then you never hear anything about it. How many times do I have to bug these guys to get an answer? And so that's a great piece of advice. Find an organization that can maybe help you advocate for that with you, right?
Yes.
Other organizations that in the disability world, maybe you can get it on their legislative agenda, right? And the other thing, so that's really important. I mean, if you spend some time trying to gain support from other people, and you want to create some critical mass on those kinds of issues, that's really important. And the other thing you find out, let me tell you this, a lot of times there's not necessarily a legislative solution for things. Agencies have rules they pass, and there's all kinds of ways that all the rules and the laws in the state happen. And I can't tell you how many times when I was a lobbyist, a lot of times people will come with an idea and you find out that you can solve it, sometimes through doing something other than changing statute. So changing statute is sort of like the most dramatic way to solve a problem, right? They don't like to change statutes very much, and when you do, it's for a good reason, and Katie is absolutely right. That usually takes some time, especially in a legislature where it's a 60-day session. You may find that maybe that's a rule issue. I don't know in terms of the partial seizure thing and I've been through this, by the way. My daughter Molly has epilepsy, so we had to go through the exemption process because she was on her meds and she couldn't have a seizure, and if she did, and she was right at about the time when she was going to get her driver's license. So I do understand that, and some of those things are really the rules that are in place by the Department of Transportation.
So then you could reach out to the Department of Transportation. If you just Google Department of Transportation Legislative Liaison, there's somebody in that position, and you can ask, hey, is this a rule change or is this a statute change? And then if it's a rule change, that would have to go through the agency. If it's a statute change, we have to go through how a bill becomes a law. Like, you have to go through the whole legislative session.
And that's kind of, in terms of the follow-up with your legislator too, it's like, could you set me up with somebody in the agency that I can talk to about this to just really understand the issue better? Because sometimes you'll find out that they might need a little push from the legislature to deal with the rule, because there are rules associated with that too. They have to have public hearings.
Yes.
There's all kinds of stuff that they do, but a lot of stuff gets done in Tallahassee without ever changing the law.
Yeah, so it's possible. It is possible, and you don't have a small voice, I promise you.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. And I know there is a loophole sort of in that, so maybe if there were clearer rules for that loophole,
Exactly.
then that might be the solution. Thank you.
Exactly.
Yes, which would be easier.
Oh, yeah.
So you mentioned that the legislature, or my bad, I got tongue-tied. It has like the most dramatic way to have something get changed.
Right.
What would be the least dramatic but still a most effective way to get that done without going to the top right away?
It depends on the issue, because some things have to legally go through the legislature. Some things can go through your city or your county government. Like, I don't know, banning plastic straws. Like, that could be a citywide ban, and that would be something that would go through your city or county government. That doesn't have to go through the state legislature. But if you want to change driver's license requirements for the entire state of Florida, that would be a statewide issue, and so you have to go through these other options.
That's true. No, that's what I was going to, and there's a big difference between sort of local requirements and ordinances and things like that, and getting them, dealing with the rulemaking process. Again, changing statute has legal ramifications. A lot of times, one of the most common phrases in Tallahassee is unintended consequences, right? So if you find out, if we change the law on this, here's all the other stuff. So a lot of times you find out that, no, let's figure out a way to be very specific. They'll work with you on it. Sometimes it's an exemption. Sometimes instead of saying, hey, you want the law to read this way, it's more of a simple, this doesn't apply to you if. That's something that happens a lot too.
I have another question.
Sure.
How would you know if you should go to the legislature or to like your average like city only people? Like, how would you know which level to jump to?
It depends on, if you have a specific issue, we could probably help, but that's another thing about going back to our first point about having that relationship with your legislative aide. So if whoever your representative or state senator is, you can email them and they have their responsibility to reply and say, well, that's not really something that we do. You should reach out to your county or city government. So just creating that relationship and emailing them and you'll get an answer.
Yeah.
I have a question on, like, because when you mention about, like, anything that's, like, a statewide issue, let's say, you know, hypothetically, if a person that's trying to, at least, like, if they're getting, like, let's say some income, like source of income, like, through the government, like, if it's, like, Social Security or whatever type of resource that they have, is, I'm going to say this to you, if there's, like, an initiative that can help, like, individuals with disabilities, because a few years ago, even though, like, I was, like, the unemployment rate, like, nationally was, like, around, like, a 5%-ish, I could be wrong on that, but even though half of that unemployment rate was people with disabilities, because there's people that can obviously, like, cannot work, and so when there was a person that brought up the idea of a universal basic income type of policy to try to get at least every single American like $1,000 a month. And I know for the biggest benefactors will be, you know, people with disabilities. Do you think that the state of Florida, or at least, you know, in our state government, to actually try to have an initiative like that to help like people with disabilities in like lower income type of housing or any type of infrastructure that can actually go forward with that?
Currently, it's not realistic for Florida. I mean, could be something federally that happens for sure.
Do you mean specifically to housing?
Well, not as much as well, affordable housing could be like one thing, but more of like, say if that individual cannot actually work, and even though like Social Security cannot actually be the only, or food stamps cannot really be the only, like, because I know they get benefits from like those type of like, you know, transportation and whatnot, but sometimes if there comes a time where a lot of those benefits can actually get cut, because really, even though you can apply to at least have, you know, like apply to Social Security, apply for food stamps, but sometimes like you're not really guaranteed of anything, that type of income that just going to be coming in, or that guarantee that kind of money that's going to be coming in. With some sort of like a universal basic income is the guarantee. And for people like my grandfather who cannot really work and has Parkinson's,
right.
And for quite a while, like my grandmother has been his caretaker, you know, because he couldn't really physically work. But unfortunately, my grandmother got COVID and she passed away the last month. So, what we're trying to at least look upon for my grandfather, even though like he does bring in or does have Social Security, it's just the fact is that it's not really much of enough to help him at least pay off for the townhouse that he has, you know, where he lives. So if, you know, hypothetically, even though it may not be the realistic opportunity to have, but if there comes a time to have that initiative, is it possible that we could still be able to have that idea to present to a state legislator?
Sure. And I think you described I think there are several programs out there that we could educate you on a little bit. And that, it brings up a good point. I mean, a lot of, we don't know what we don't know, right? And so a lot of times there's programs out there that can help supplement. There's disability stuff. There's the waiver. There's other programs. And so that's going to be a lot about educating what they may or may not qualify for. And it's always hard when you're crossing over in services, right?
Right.
And so that's kind of a longer process that we're talking about. But learning first, and then if you find that there's a gap, then yeah. Absolutely.
And you can still reach out to your aide because they can help you navigate all of these services. I mean, we're happy to help you, but also creating that relationship with your aide or your legislator, it is their job and their responsibility to help you navigate all the programs and resources that are out there. So they can help you with that too.
Jeremy?
Hey there. Going back to what we were talking about at the beginning about developing relationships with your legislators. I've heard it said on the one hand that many legislators are more likely to listen to their constituents, so you should figure out who represents your area and you should go talk to that person specifically, which makes sense. My question is this: what if you have an issue, just as an example, Medicaid expansion, right? It's a relatively partisan, and perhaps you are strongly in favor of it, and you know the person representing your area, that's going to be a non-starter for them for partisan reasons. So if you're in that kind of dynamic, are you better off trying to find somebody who is on the same side of the issue as you are and talk to that legislator, or is it worth putting the effort to kind of represent your views to somebody that you think is probably not going to be very amenable to them? How do you sort of navigate that issue of, oh, people are going to listen to people in their district, and having somebody representing your district who might fundamentally disagree with something that you are in support of, or vice versa?
Good question.
Well, they have a responsibility to listen to all sides of every story, and I think it's best to talk to everyone and not just one. If you would like to talk to one that agrees with you, sure, if you think that would be the most effective way, but.
Yeah, I was gonna say just two things on that. I think, in a situation like that, talking to the person that disagrees with you is just as important as talking to the person that does agree with you, right? I mean, because at the end of the day, if it's something that we're trying to move forward, so that may be true, and you're going in and I'm going to have a no at the end of the day, still have the meeting. It's still your right to, and it's still good for them to hear from people. It is, a lot of times we're talking to people that agree with us all the time. It's a good idea to get out there and have that meeting anyway and tell them why. Let them hear your perspective. And there's your state house and your state senate, so you're going to have a state senator. In that situation, so you'll have two people if you're unlucky that you think you're not going to get anywhere with both. We have delegations, county delegations. So while, it might waste my time for me to come and see your person in Pensacola, when I live in Tallahassee, there are other people in the Leon County delegation that I could go see, and they're going to be a lot more, especially if you're fairly close by. Yeah. To go
One
see.
thing I would like to add too, let's say you go and you meet with your legislator that disagrees with you wholeheartedly on this issue. Go in this meeting and write down all of their reasons why. So I know for Medicaid expansion right now, there's 23,000 people waiting for services in Florida. That's a big number. Yep. The argument that I hear all the time is that we don't have the bandwidth to do that. We don't have the bandwidth or the money. So write down their counter arguments. So then when this bill or this policy issue comes up in committee, and let's say you're testifying, you already know what their counter arguments are, and you can make your defense good and strong. And you can say, actually, we do have the bandwidth to do this, or X, Y, Z sort of thing.
And mechanically, I would say also now, listen, the COVID, this last couple of years, if they've given us nothing, it's the virtual aspect of this, and so all of these committee hearings are online. I mean, they were for a little while, but nothing's getting missed anymore. So if you go to that website, like I mentioned before, myfloridahouse.gov, and you're tracking a bill, it'll tell you when it's coming up, and you can go right to that committee hearing, you can hear it, and it's really important to hear. I can't tell you how many times I've had an argument to make, and there's weaknesses in that argument. It's very helpful to just take the time investment to listen to both sides of the issue. It makes you a better advocate. So watch the hearing, hear what they're saying, and so that you can just be better prepared.
And be nice. I mean, we see so many people in the Capitol that are, and we have a right to do that. I'm not saying that, but if you want something to get across the finish line, getting up and yelling and saying, you're the worst legislator, or booing them, they're not going to help you. And so at the end of the day, you want your issue passed, right? It's not going to work if you don't have a good attitude about it. And that can be really hard, I know.
I can't tell you how many times in my life I was meeting with somebody and they disagreed with me. And it can be very frustrating, but I promise you sometimes the person who is fighting you on an issue is your biggest advocate the next day. Never burn the bridge. People can come to opposite positions with just as much integrity as we have. And that's just an important thing to keep in mind, so never burn the bridge.
Yeah. And you never know who you'll work with today that will be in charge of a committee in 5 years.
Yeah.
So if you get that meeting with your aide today, they might be in charge of the Senate Committee on Education, and we need, that person for our bill.
right.
So like anybody that you meet in the process, I guarantee you will meet them again. So just always just try your best to be as kind as you can.
Especially if somebody is new in the process, like if they're a freshman legislator. I mean, we have term limits now, so nobody's the chairman of a committee for more than 2 years anymore,
Yeah.
rarely. So it's a constant change. So just remember that.
Yeah. Do we have
Any
other
other questions?
questions
How
about
we doing on time?
policy, legislative life, anything? Hey.
So when you said state house, it sounded like steakhouse, and it made me think if you were to invite someone to dinner, what would be an appropriate action and what's an inappropriate? So I know there's certain rules about gifts and
Yeah.
things like that.
Right.
What would be appropriate if you were to go to them in an offered generousness and to offer things to them? I know they probably can't accept things, so what are appropriate actions and inappropriate actions? You don't want to put them in an awkward situation where they feel uncomfortable, right?
Right.
So what would be something that you can still go to them and make them feel appreciated, but not in an unacceptable
Sure.
way?
So there is a gift ban.
Yeah, don't give gifts. I mean, that's really, I mean,
I think it's like
technically,
$25 or something.
it is the lobby, it's for lobbyists, right?
Okay,
If
but
you're an
you-
organization with a lobbyist, or you are yourself a lobbyist, I mean, if your neighbor happened to be a legislator, you could, buy that person a meal, I'm sure, but you just be very sensitive to that. I mean, you cannot give gifts to legislators if you are attempting to influence. You can give, actually, it's not just gifts, it's nothing of value.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of lawyers who are making a lot of money trying to define what is nothing of value. Is that a seat in a restaurant? Is that, the short answer to all of it is yeah. Just try not to give the gifts. You just can't, you really just can't give gifts.
One gift that I would say, if you meet with your legislator or if you meet with an aide, write them a thank you card.
Yes.
And say, thank you for meeting with me last Wednesday to talk about driver's license and, expansion or whatever in Florida. Say what your meeting was, thank them for that, because they are going to remember that, and gratitude goes a long way, because oftentimes it's very thankless.
And by the way, that applies to the staff as well. So that's called a
Yes.
reportable person. Everybody who works for the legislature has to report gifts. And look, there's no reason to be giving gifts really anyway. I mean, but if it was like a lunch or something like that, if you have a personal relationship with the person, that's one thing. But not even if you're a registered lobbyist, you can't do that. So I'm getting a signal that we're running out of time here.
Oh,
So,
wow, okay. How much time do we have?
I guess, are we?
One more question. Who wants to be the final question? Okay, we have one in the way back. We'll get you a mic.
Yes, I have a question about losing everything about my house down in Naples because I get the bill, even though that's what stressed me and my mother out. What do I do, or where do I contact? Do I contact my legislator, or do I contact? I'm trying to spit it out right here.
No, so you've
yeah.
lost your house with your mother, is what I'm understanding. And so how do you navigate that, or what resources? So we're happy to, walk you through, talking through what options you have.
There are going to be some services that you can, with the local government. I'm not sure that's necessarily a state legislative issue, but there's going to be different organizations that can help you figure out your next steps, and we can talk to you about that as well directly.
Yeah.
Sorry to hear that.
Yes, after losing my grandfather, my mom's father, so yes, you're losing everybody in this world. Yes, I am a bit nervous trying to spit it out, but I don't know, where do I start? Do I start contacting, get my services, or what do I do?
Right. Well, like I said, let's talk to you a little bit offline, because there's several organizations I can think of that can assist with some of those needs you have with the bills. Yeah.
All right. Thank y'all so much for listening to us jab.
Thanks, guys.
All right, Joe.